Welcome to the Humanergy Leadership Podcast, where we tackle your toughest leadership challenges and share practical tools to help you lead with impact. Welcome to this episode. I'm David Wheatley, your host today, and I'm joined by the good doctors, Dr. Judy Brown and Dr. Rick Eigenbrod. Neither of them ever address themselves as doctor. I don't know why I always do that, but I insist. If you met them, they're Judy and Rick, and so that works. And today's episode is going to be another conversational one. The question I posed was, how do we lead through turbulence? And that turbulence is broad. It's all the wild stuff that can be going on in your environment, your industry, or even globally at the moment. But that turbulence requires a different kind of leadership. And so we thought we'd have a conversation about what leadership in a time of turbulence looks like. So Rick, I think you're going to start us off.
Thank you. And again, thanks for the invitation. These have been great fun with conversations with you and Judy, which leads me to, one of the things that I realize we've offered over the years are one-liners. And these have been our attempts to capture in simple language very complex ideas, dynamics. And one of the ones that's relevant here, I think, that we've used and referenced on a number of occasions has to do with this notion of conversation is a fertile ground for emergence. And without realizing it, today's topic in Judy and I's deliberation and collaboration and consideration came from exactly that. So what we are living through and demonstrating today, right now, in this moment, is that dynamic, that out of that conversation emerged this session on turbulence, managing through turbulence and change. So one of the things that emerged from our conversation was a number of realizations, perspectives, if you will. One of which is we are experiencing in our lives, in our personal lives, and in our professional lives, that is in our work with leaders and their organizations, a different quantitatively and qualitatively, a difference in what they're experiencing with respect to this turbulence and change, which have really become in some way cliches. They've lost their power to impact us. They are so familiar that there's a kind of yeah quality to them. Mm-hmm. And so we started to dig down a little bit and think about it. So one of the things we realize is in terms of the language that we use, even VUCA, just for an example, VUCA has become so familiar that it's almost, it's almost a cliche, right? Yes, volatility, uncertainty, change, ambiguity. There's no wallop in that. If anything, rather than a caution, we take it almost as, oh, that could be exciting and fun. So how do we capture? What's the language that we can use now or invent that helps us really understand, both intellectually, emotionally, psychologically, organizationally, any way you want? How do we look at, and what language do we use to try and describe what we're seeing on a daily basis? Mm-hmm. And that is the nature and rate of change is so profoundly different than the way we've been thinking about it, our attitudes towards it. And that what we are experiencing in a micro and macro way that is both personally and in the world is what we're experiencing is a full-scale assault on our taken for granted. And that is not comforting. It's not necessarily inviting. It's not necessarily exciting. But as we talk along today, I think we'll begin to reference or create reference points that demonstrate that that's true. Turn on your TV this morning. And so that's what we'd like to offer today. The latest in our thinking about what lies ahead, how we need to think about it, and to quote that another great one-liner, how you know is how you go. So the first job of a leader is to think about how they think about something. And that's what we'd like to offer today. Our thinking about how we're thinking about this very familiar notion of turbulence, change, VUCA.
And so
David,
just
you want to wade in?
want to fill in a few bits. So we've used the term VUCA, and for those that aren't familiar, it's as Rick says, a well-known tool. If you Google the letters VUCA, you'll probably get more than you want on that. The volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So that's the reference to that piece. I think the other thing that you just mentioned are the nature and the rate of change. And Launda and I were out in the woods the other day having a conversation about, do you think every generation has gone through this moment as we clock over some numbers in age and say, well, yeah, we remember when you had to sit in the hallway to make a phone call and things like that. And I think to a great extent, most generations have. It's just been accelerated in the last 150 years. So first maybe with the steam engine and the internal combustion engine, and then you look at the internet in the last 30 years, and then AI now in the last 3 weeks. That just seems to be accelerating at such a rate. And so I really love that the nature and the rate of change being the biggest influence on the turbulence that we're talking about. Never mind tariffs or whatever else is going on in the world right now. It's just the nature and the rate of change, which I think we're worth pulling out.
So when I was thinking about this, the first thing that comes to mind is what to do with all this turbulence. And I found myself writing down, fasten your seatbelt. Fasten your seatbelt, because otherwise, if that plane lands upside down, you're going to be on your head. And at least having the seatbelt on will keep you in a place for a moment so you can get out safely. So that's a silly analogy, but it brings me back to the notion that we've had ways of thinking about ongoing change before. The strongest for me was Peter Vail's idea of leading in permanent whitewater. And when I think about that language, what it helped us see was that our waiting for things to settle down was not helping us because things weren't going to settle down. And that what we know already about the nature of waves and the nature of white water, which David knows a lot about from kayaking, gives us some clues of what to do, how to handle this. And then if I look at VUCA and David, you had a slide up that not only had what VUCA stood for, but the strategies for how to deal with it. I'm sorry to pick on you.
I can, I'll throw it up on the screen for those that are watching, and for those that are listening, I'll explain what I've got up on the screen, which is just a slide with the VUCA tool across the top, but then it's also been expanded by, in this case, the good folks at Moro, that they call it VUCA Prime, which is how to address it.
Right.
And so then you address volatility with vision, you address uncertainty with understanding, you address complexity with clarity, and you address ambiguity with agility.
Right. Which is a very useful notion, because what this tells us is there's a way to manage this. All right, this is a management strategy for dealing with volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. But the newest descriptor of what we're experiencing is called BANI, B-A-N-I, and it stands for four other words, the four initials do. Let me go slowly through these for those of you who are listening and want to take a note on the language. BANI stands for brittle, as in not agile, not flexible, brittle. Anxious, as in how we feel in the midst of this. So that's a feeling sense of what we're dealing with. Anxious. That's
Judy, can also now had a very small example of that.
good. You're on.
I just took a flight to Denver and back.
Yeah.
2 hours each way. In the old days, I wouldn't have thought 1 minute about whether I was going to go or not. I would have not, my experience of the whole thing would be very different. And yet, because of all the things we're seeing in the world at a global, technological, et cetera, over and over and over, our sense about airplane travel,
right,
all of that has assaulted, I think, not just mine, but many other people's taken for granted.
I think that's
about a basic public utility.
Right. And what we can do and what we can count on. And for those of you who are watching this later as a visual, David, who is fabulous at this,
Fabulous, David.
put up a visual of BANI, a BANI world in which things are brittle, they break, in which people are anxious, in which what's going on is non-linear. So small things cause huge reactions and huge efforts get nothing. And incomprehensible, and he has a question mark up there. I think the challenge for us is we are used to figuring out, and this is a non-figure outable world. So what's our stance given that? I mean, Rick has often asked this question, which I think is enormously helpful now, which is what is your relationship with uncertainty? And it's just what is it? How are you in the face of it, in the space of it? How do you operate? If this is not solvable. It's not fixable. It's not figure outable. And so I think the question is, what is our way, not what are we going to do, but what is our way of being individually and with each other in the face of this kind of reality where we can't say to our folks, look, I can tell you what to expect, or I can tell you what I expect, or I can tell you what you should be doing about it, because things may be topsy-turvy tomorrow. So this for me is the real challenge. And it is, I think the language I would use at this point is, it is it's an emotional and physical challenge. It's a spiritual challenge. It's about our orientation in this world and what we encourage in each other. So I just want to give as an example, I hang out with a lot of crowds who are really upset about a lot of stuff that's going on these days. And the favorite work is to just list all the terrible, awful things that are going on, one after another, and then to embellish on them. And I noticed that
That's what Facebook's for.
Yes. And sometimes coffee gatherings. Yes, that's exactly right. And I notice, and I think this is part of my own discipline in dealing with BANI, I notice myself not participating. I notice myself pulling back. I notice myself shifting the question in the middle of things. I notice I notice myself encouraging somebody who does something that really changes the air quality in the room, if you want to use that term. It's a different kind of leadership, and it's I led a retreat a few days ago, not usually in my specialty area at all, about river quality on one of the rivers. I live on a creek, so this matters to me, but it's not my creek. It was a different one. And I noticed myself when people were sort of in turmoil about how things were and things weren't necessarily getting better on the creek, spotting what some people had seen and had done that was a sign of a place to work, something to do more of. Um, and so I think part of this is about spotting what really has, in the midst of all this, really has vitality in life and might move us in a direction that has possibility when we can't know for sure what that is. So anyway, that's kind of my riff on this.
I just want to put up another graphic, actually, while we're at it, that my colleague Corey Fernandez shared, because I think it summarizes a lot of what you're saying. And he shares this graphic, and it's a picture of a country lane. And the left-hand side is perfectly clear, and the right-hand side is very blurry.
Yes.
And he uses this slide because that's what you're talking about. We're driving along. All of our taken for granted are on the left-hand side. We know how it is. And all of a sudden, the visual changes to the one on the right, and
Yes.
life becomes blurry.
Right.
And what you were emphasizing there, Judy, is the people who can bring clarity out of that blurriness are the leaders we need in this time of hyper change.
But yes, what it would take is, if you have any smarts, you slow down. You can't bring that picture into focus moving. That's the speed you're moving on the left-hand side.
Well, I think,
Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, Judy. I'm sorry.
Yep, Ron.
We do this all the time. I wanted to go back to something you said earlier. The first thing is, what's going to be the nature of the relationship to the leader with that picture?
Right.
You know, we could list very quickly all the kind of different reactions that the leader could have, and more importantly, that we know we have,
right,
to that picture. I want to offer an example. If you go back to what drives economic growth, it's two things. It's population and productivity. Okay, so let's think of this. What are we seeing in the world that we're not paying attention to? My daughter's 40, asking questions about, does she want to have children?
Right.
That was a small subpopulation historically, because everybody was going to have kids. And where I grew up in New Orleans in that time, you just didn't have kids. You had 6 kids, my family. And so we're hearing in Japan, we're hearing in China, we're hearing in other places, we're here in the United States. Are taken for granted is populations will grow because the mental models behind it and the sociological imperatives and the economic incentives to get married, have children, and buy a house. I'm hearing more and more from my friends that their kids are not going to buy a house. One, they can't afford it. And two, they're saying, I could have this thing where all my money, I can be house poor. I can have this house and it will eat up all my economic resources, or I can do something else with it. And oh, by the way, I'm seeing that AI may take my job. And so productivity is not going to come from population, it's going to come from technology. And all of a sudden, my mind is just getting blown. That one conversation with my daughter led to this assault on the taken for granted.
Right.
Long example.
And a good example.
And even dying. You and I talked about how we're going to die.
Right.
So the mental models from birth to death. There are companies out there that make billions of dollars helping people move from the last part of living to dying. And it's mostly bricks and mortar.
Yeah, this is my territory.
And I'm going to give you one example, and I'm going to turn it over to you. I live in the Bay Area. I live near Stanford University. Thank God. There is and it's come on, Mid-Peninsula, as we call it, wealthy. There is a fabulous resource just across the street from the hospital. It's called the V. they will get, it's amazing. They do an amazing job of taking care of people in this kind of what's called a step down, right? And if you want to get into V, somewhere 7 or 8 years out, you give them $2 million.
Right.
And there are variants of that all over the place. Except now in my conversation with my friends, we are talking about this thing, an alternative, an assault on a taken for granted, that we're not going to end that way. We're going to age in place. What does that mean for what companies?
Right.
That you're on.
So most of my leadership work these days is with people who lead life care communities, the business that Rick just described. And so I'm working with my 19th year of cohorts of people who are emerging leaders in this field. And the conversations are about what about this isn't working? And it touches on nobody can figure out if you use the bricks and mortar model that you have to build very luxurious, I would call them cruise ships on land for people who want a lot of amenities, that the middle class can't afford any of this. The people who work in the places can't ever afford to live there. And that says nothing about people who are in lower levels of economic wealth. So then the question becomes, so how do you change your thinking about these things? And one of the best examples is when one organization, and this was in Tennessee, was getting ready to build the state-of-the-art nursing home, just fabulous. This was about 20 years ago. Suddenly, the executive said to the board chair, this is the worst idea we've ever had. We're going to build the best of what nobody wants. Nobody wants to end up in a nursing home. So so they stopped, and they had already raised the money and dug spades in the ground. They stopped. That is an act of leadership courage that's just unheard of. And instead began to work with people in the field who were troublemakers, because that's where, when you're dealing with this stuff, you really want to look to the troublemakers, the people who just say, what you're doing is ridiculous, it won't work, you have to do something different. And they look to a troublemaker who helped them develop a thing called the greenhouse, which is a beautiful living room and a kitchen and individual little cottages, I would call it. That's the easiest way to understand it, in a circle, where you can go into the kitchen and make yourself a chocolate chip cookie anytime you want. And so that, and what's called the villages model, where people in a community decide to put something together themselves, neighbor to neighbor to neighbor, and come up with enough support to help them, are the beginnings, I would say, of our thinking falling apart and falling into new places. And yet it's terribly hard, because in the case of hotels, back before Marriott decided it was in the hospitality business, not the bricks and mortar, it's enormously hard for entire fields to let go of their way of doing things, because their futures and their money and everything is invested in a particular model, which when I think I want to age in place right here on the creek, am a real problem for. So how, as leaders, do we alert ourselves to the way in which getting better at what we do now is our biggest problem? So that's kind of where I am ranting about this.
It really
Judy,
comes
think
back to
about
those
this.
four things that we summarized in the bottom part of VUCA, what they call the VUCA prime. You're talking about an accelerated vision, so people that can quickly see beyond the norm, a better understanding of what's actually happening, more clarity as to what we need to do, and the agility to move, to stop digging and say, okay, the fact that we've dug a foundation, irrelevant, we're going to
Right.
move in this other direction.
But there's
And
one other thing. If you go back to that picture you showed where on the left-hand side it's clear, and on the right-hand side it's all uncertain. It's become all foggy. As leaders, we're tempted to say to our people, I see clearly on this side. It's that our mind is still holding on to the clarity that is no longer relevant to the situation, David. I'm not sure clarity is even the right word for it. So
it
I'm not
kind
sure
of
that,
goes to the vision piece of it, doesn't it? Can I actually see the world differently,
right.
fundamentally differently?
And
Yeah,
that is a huge challenge when you think of what that requires of us. It means that we have to see the world entirely differently.
not clearly. Think about what that means. Think about the impact of what we just,
Differently, not clearly.
that the goal isn't to see it clearly. The goal is to have the capacity to see it differently. How many organizations do you know? Executive teams do we know? Everything, it is set up around the search for clarity. The
Wow.
executive teams go in the room. There is, whether we say it or not, there is this inferred notion we're going to seek clarity. And by the way, when we find it, then we'll move. We don't go till we know, oh, by the way, everybody who comes in the room has their own idea of what's clear to them about the situation, as opposed to inviting people in a room and say, we have to look at this differently. Let's go to work.
Right.
And I just had that. This is crazy. Um, what we are doing right now, what David is doing right now, in less than a year can be irrelevant because they're not going to tune into this. They're going to tune into AI. And the
Right.
questions that they're asking and hoping to get answers from by tuning into us, whether it's on this medium or I work with them individually, certainly in a whole executive it's already there in the whole executive coaching, quote unquote, executive coaching profession, that there are companies setting up to provide what personal, individual humans provided through AI. And companies are saying, wow, why would I pay $500 an hour for some human being to give me what I can get by going on AI? And it's just going to get better and better and better. And so think about it. An assault on the taken for granted is nobody's going to want to listen to us.
You're absolutely right. And we actually have regular meetings at Humanergy about that because we're trying to keep up with AI as best we can.
Right.
And so we are building our own AI that will answer leadership questions for our clients based on Humanity's tools and language, and then looking at how that becomes complementary to what we do. And so if it's just a simple question, you'll be able to go to AI and have it answered. The other thing that I was reading last week, as we read all our AI material that most of my business partners send, is that AI is making us more stupid. AI is actually reducing critical thinking. And I just reached out to a professor to see if we can get some college student to do research into the correlation between the increase in AI and the increase in Dunning-Kruger, because I think it will be well
In what?
in the Dunning-Kruger effect.
What's that?
Put simply, it's that people who aren't very smart will over-exaggerate their ability.
Oh.
And I
And
think we're seeing a lot more of that with AI because we can plug it in and say I'm an expert in it because I can use ChatGPT.
but I listened to a different model today that's about AI that would bring us back, David, to you or bring us back to Rick. And it was a thing called a Wobot. And it's set up for middle school children who want to talk, who would be in line for um, mental health support, but they can't get to it fast enough. And so what the Wobot is something that is created by psychologists to provide responses that have good science behind them, so that young kids who are troubled can type in or talk to the Wobot, who then gives them a chance to say what they're saying that is hard to say at the dining room table with their parents, is even hard to say to a psychologist when they don't know them. And it becomes a path back to feeling comfortable in a connection, either with a family member they can't currently talk to or with a psychologist who can be a help to them. Now, that's a complete on end of the usual way we think about AI as distancing and as taking our place. This becomes a natural way to bring people back to us, better prepared to make good use of what we have to offer, and with a method that if someone really is in trouble, it alerts the adult who's monitoring this to get them help fast.
Right. Yeah, because to Rick's point, I've already seen we put out an AI episode of the podcast maybe 100 episodes ago, and it's only got easier and better to do. If you look at Notebook LM, which is one of the AIs, it will actually create a podcast. If you put material in, two people will talk about that material, and it's really good. And so there is that. But I think that the challenge with it all that gets leaders thinking is, on one end of the AI is how we get more efficient and productive at stuff. That's what AI is going to do. At the other end, it's how we stay human about this and do the things that humans can do. And David, it's interesting that my marketing director, Mimi again, had some T-shirts printed for a conference recently that had on the back, lead boldly, stay human.
Wow.
And I just thought that was one of our lines now, because I think that's a challenge for the future, is we should be doing this. We should be adopting all of these advantages that AI have, and we should be thinking differently, which is, I think, to Rick's point, is it's not just about trying to get that clarity again. It's about, seeing things differently from a starting point.
Yeah. David, I love that. I love what you came up with. Let me give you an example from my work that's just like that. We said it's about what's going to be our relationship to this assault on it taken for granted. I mean, think about how taken for granted is everything around us based on what we offer in the world and what people will pay us for. That's getting blown up so quickly. And you have a relationship that says, let's look at this, not as a substitute for what we do, but as an enhancement of what we do. And let me give you a really quick example. My work, a lot of my work is with people who sold their businesses and find themselves, with a blank sheet of paper and don't know how to engage it. Right. So one of my clients has done a great job with the thought process and reflective work we've done, 50 pages worth of his reflections. And he heard me talk about Karen Horney's work. You know what he did? He went to AI and said, here's 50 pages of stuff I've thought about, put it through Karen Horney's model. And you know what? It's bloody fabulous. I was gobsmacked how good it was. But then it hit me, David. That's taking information from the outside and considering it from a conceptual point of view. But if I say, what I said to him is, you can't do that. I'm cutting you off from AI in this process. You go to Karen Horney. You do the work. You do the analysis. You ask yourself that question. You have those conversations. You discover. You come up with your own conclusions. And then you can go to AI for enhancement. And that work inside is what you're saying, David. That work needs to be done. If we're going to develop as human beings, that work has to be done. What if our job as experts in that internal work is where we now add value?
Yeah. Well, I think that nails it, doesn't it? We've even got around to how do we manage our world? It's we have to help people with the internal work, which AI can't always do. Although the AI therapists are measuring higher than human therapists at the moment on some scales, but that giving people the setup to get folks to do that, whether it's go do the AI work and then be critical about it, or whether it's be critical about stuff and then let AI polish it, it's being different either way.
Yes.
And I think what we're trying to do at Humanergy, we've not put the same term to it, is think differently about what we do, not
Yes.
think about how we can do more of it. So I like the way you've summarized that. And I think that's one of those things for leaders. And as we wrap up now, is that helping people think differently, not just harder or more or that looking for clarity on what you already have, but to actually think very differently. And then that idea of the full scale assault on our taken for granted is it should be a question leaders are asking their teams on a regular basis. What are we taking for granted
Yeah.
that's going to go away in the next 6 months?
Yeah.
And so I think that's a really exciting conversation for leadership teams to be having is what are we currently taking for granted?
Yeah.
And then how is it being assaulted?
So, David, maybe I'm going to offer, and Judy and I, on behalf of Judy and I, maybe a thought for wrap up. And you've almost said exactly what we're going to say. If you look at what teams normally do, what people normally do when they think, they're always have in the back of their head what do you do about it?
Mm-hmm.
And the more anxious a group gets, the more likely someone's going to scream out, let's create some action steps. Why? Because action burns anxiety. And what they're solving for is anxiety. We've seen it over and over and over again. And people leave the room and they're so relieved. Not that those action steps are really great, but that I feel better. So here's a thought that we would like to offer that we think fits with the general tenor of our conversation today and goes back to where we started. What if reflection and conversation were action steps?
That shut us both up for long enough. I think that I want to leave that as the call to action to folks as they finish off listening to this one. What if reflection and conversation were action steps? And what does that look like in people's lives so that they can, if I go through my list here, so that they can understand the nature and the rate of change. They're looking at their taken for granted and working out what's assaulting them. They're looking at what their relationship with uncertainty is. They're thinking about their state of being, not their state of doing. And they're focused not on more clarity, but on seeing things differently. Rick, Judy, another wonderful conversation. We could go on all evening with this. Maybe we'll pick it up again as we get into the fall, but thank you for joining us.
Thank you, David.
Thanks, David.
That was the Humanergy Leadership Podcast. Make sure you like and subscribe and visit humanergy.com for many more resources.